about someone who actually really loves to sing, and maybe is in the choir at their school, maybe has opportunities to audition for a solo coming up, and so they choose to do that, and it was really anxiety-provoking. So the next time they have an opportunity to audition for a solo, they say, you know, that was really, really hard for me. I don't think I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll audition for a duet. But their brain is starting to learn, like, I don't do hard things, right? So the next time, maybe it was really hard again to do the duet, and maybe they didn't get the piece that they wanted. So the next time they have an opportunity, they say, you know, I'm not even going to audition. That's really too hard for me. I'll stay singing in the choir, but I'm not going to have, you know, this other role. And over time, oh my gosh, it's really hard to sing in the choir. There's a lot of eyes on me. I still love to sing, but this is just something that gets relegated to my life at home. And over time, it's leading that person who loves to sing, that is something that brings them meaning and joy in their life, to just narrow their highway. It's not closed. They can still enjoy something, but when we're thinking about how you want to live your life, I really encourage people to try and always come back to this question of, can I make this decision based on my values, what matters to me, what's going to bring me meaning, maybe not enjoyment, but meaning, versus my emotion. Make a decision based on value versus emotion. Because sometimes our emotions give us really important information, like if we're about to step out into a road and there's a car coming at us, listen to your emotion of fear that says, yeah, maybe don't do that. But oftentimes, they start to limit our lives. So let's talk a little bit more about the cycle of avoidance. This is typically how it plays out. Like I said, it starts with a difficult situation. So let's imagine Johnny receives a difficult assignment, and he goes home and he starts to work on it, and he experiences discomfort. So we've got the 3 different parts here. We've got the thoughts in his head of, I can't do this. He starts to work on it. He's like, wow, I knew it was going to be hard. It's even harder than I expected. This doesn't come easy to me. I'm never going to get it. And maybe that even cascades to, I'm a failure. I can't do this at all. Leads to symptoms of heart racing, maybe muscle tension, things like that. So if you had those symptoms, if you felt all that stuff in your body and had the thoughts of, I can't do this, I'm a failure, you might also choose to avoid. So Johnny chooses to play video games for now. I'll go work on that assignment a little bit later, he thinks. And you know, later comes and goes, and maybe he did have that thought about it once or twice, and he thinks, you know, I can't go back to that assignment. I just am a failure. And in the moment, it feels like relief. Oh my gosh, I wouldn't have been able to do that anyway. Thank goodness I avoided it. What a better evening I had playing my games, because I would have just failed. But then, of course, the next time he has a difficult assignment, again, whether it's in math or it bleeds into other things, he starts to have this belief about himself, I can't do hard things. Let's focus on a more depressive type cycle. So imagine a student of yours has a conflict with her parents. Jamie, let's imagine, has a conflict with her parents. They argue over something like screen time, right? Or social media apps, whether she's allowed to have them on her phone, and she storms off. She has the thought, no one understands me, my parents don't get me, they're never going to get me, I'm all alone, and it leads to these feelings of irritability, really sort of like aggression with her family, and also fatigue, and I should just stay, you know, in my room alone. So she goes into her room that night. The next morning, she has the opportunity to go downstairs and have breakfast with her parents, but she avoids it because she doesn't like the conflict. That also limits her opportunity to clear the air with them, right? Or to have a repair in any way. And that leads to more and more withdrawal from family activities. And she just holds on to that resentment and anger that they don't understand her, and she doesn't give them a chance to show her that maybe, you know, that there's something else that could be true, that if they communicate, there could be a better outcome. Again, it leads to relief in that, like, I was right about my parents, I am all alone. So of course, that is going to lead to future conflict with parents, right? So these things that can become pretty entrenched cycles unless you intervene somewhere to change that cycle, that pattern. So for the sake of time, I guess I should pay attention to time, we don't have to take too long, but you might want to think about, and if you have the handouts, you can write in them at some point of your own, something for yourself. something that's difficult for you, an emotion that comes up for you, or a situation that comes up for you that you tend to avoid or withdraw from, or something like that. And you can try and identify that situation, what typical thoughts, feelings you are vulnerable to in that situation, and how you avoid. And again, we want to think about those really obvious avoidance things, like the young girl who decided not to go to the birthday party. That's pretty obvious. But it's also subtle things like, oh, when I get to this difficult section of the form I have to fill out, I tend to go play an online game for 5 minutes before I force myself to finish. Those type of things. Again, maybe they're not that problematic for you, but those are the types of things where we notice that's emotional avoidance. All right. So what are some messages to take away for yourself and for your students? Well, we haven't talked too much about this today, but you can't choose your thoughts. So we have what we call automatic thoughts. When you enter a room full of people and you're giving a talk, your brain is just automatically going to have some thoughts about that. We can work hard to help you change some of those thoughts or help your students identify more helpful thoughts, but that can be quite hard, and it's probably not, at least in the short term, going to change the automatic thought. So judging yourself or trying to change the first reaction you have to something is a little bit futile and not that helpful. So you can't choose your thoughts. You also can't choose your feelings. So the way that we physiologically respond to something is not under our control. And the more people try to control how they feel, so I think of individuals who have panic attacks in this way. It feels horrible to have a panic attack, so understandably they want to prevent those panic attacks from happening. But the more you resist those, the more hypervigilant you become to all the physiological symptoms you have in your body, and then what do you know? You start to notice the tiniest fluttering of your heart, and it becomes a full-fledged panic attack out of nowhere. So you can't choose your feelings, and the more you try, I think the more unhelpful people find it. You can't choose your thoughts, but you can choose your behaviors. And it's not that it's easy to choose our behaviors. Sometimes it almost feels like, especially for young children or impulsive children, it feels like the behavior happens before the thoughts or the feelings. But that is the one area where I feel like behaviors are the low-hanging fruit, because it is something where we can feel empowered to make a change. And it doesn't make things worse, unlike with trying to change your feelings where it might make things worse. So I encourage you to think about how to just cultivate among your students these powerful messages of, doing things when you're afraid, right? That you don't have to wait until the fear goes away in order to do something that matters to you. That actually the thing that we can choose is our behavior. We can't choose our feelings, so let's just do that hard thing afraid. And then the secret is that over time, the more you do hard things, the easier they're going to be, and you won't be as afraid. But if that's the motivation, sometimes, again, it becomes one of these sticky cycles where the more you're doing it to make your anxiety go away, the more your anxiety might stick around. So it's about changing that relationship with our emotions to saying, it's okay, I'm going to accept that I have uncomfortable emotions from time to time. Sometimes I'm just going to feel down. Sometimes I'm going to feel anxious. Again, it's a human experience, but regardless of how I'm feeling, I can choose what I do. And that's where I come back to this idea of emotional versus values-based decisions. Let's make some choices for ourselves about things that matter to us. In the long run, that's going to lead to more enjoyment, to more happiness probably, even though in the moment, it might mean choosing to do something while you're afraid or while you're feeling down. And then I also encourage you to model those type of behaviors for your students. One thing that we know about persistence and perseverance, and this is maybe from the literature with very, very small children, is that they become more persistent, perseverant when they see people, their models, their role models, struggle with something and then continue to do it anyway. So, of course, you're going to be more skilled and have a lot more talent and hours of practice behind you than a lot of your students. But if they see you struggle with something and then continue with it, that's going to be modeling for them that that's something that they can do as well. And of course, I'm thinking broadly in their whole life that's important. If I think about one, characteristic or trait that is really going to make a difference in people's lives, it is perseverance. when something is hard and you stick with it because it's important to you, I feel like that is going to bleed into all aspects of your life in a positive way. And so certainly piano is a beautiful place to practice that, right? The other thing I think about is, if we come back to this idea of anxiety and depression and how that might impact your students, well, certainly performances and the amount of practice that is demanded in this type of discipline, those are areas where people could start to withdraw, right? Whether it's because they have anxiety of performance or of the sight reading or whatever piece of it, or if it's because now they are starting to become depressed and they're losing interest in things that matter to them. I could understand how piano might be at one of those first things that people would start to pull back from. And again, it's not your job to force them to do this, to continue, but to encourage it in any way that they can continue, because we think about activities like piano as mastery activities, things that bring meaning just by doing something hard for yourself and overcoming those hardships to learn something, to feel accomplishment and pride in, you know, doing something that was difficult for you. So that is something that can both alleviate anxiety and depression in the longer term, although in the shorter term it is going to bring those symptoms up probably a little bit, because it does make you feel uncomfortable to do things that are difficult or anxiety-provoking. The other thing I like to point out, and again, it's a motto that you can model or even share, is this idea of doing things before you're ready. Don't wait for motivation to strike before you act, because the longer you wait for motivation, the less likely it is to come. For me, the way that plays out the most is when I have a project I have to get started on, or a writing assignment I have to get started on, and again, like, I know this and I still have to choose it every single time. You have to override the brain's natural tendency to just say, I'll wait until I'm ready. And every time I have to remind myself, no, I have to set a time on my calendar when I'm going to do it, and I have to do it anyway, even if I'm not ready. And even if it turns out bad, just the act of getting started on it, that's when the motivation follows. Motivation comes once you've started something, for a lot of experiences. So as much as you can model and describe and encourage, to just set a time to do it, and do it even if you're not ready. All right, let's see about time. Okay, we have a couple minutes to just go through this. So I think we've hit a lot of this already, but there's a couple more things I just want to really specifically point out about, like, emotional behaviors versus value behaviors. And another way to think of that is the unhelpful quick fixes that feel good now but probably have problematic outcomes, and then the healthy investments. What can you do for yourself that might be harder now, but it's going to lead to better outcomes long term? So withdrawal, stepping away from people and things that might make that emotion go away right now, but it's going to make things more problematic for you long term. Procrastination, just hitting, I don't know even what it is, like next on Netflix, or letting it passively play the next one. That is both the best and worst thing that they ever invented. That rigid thinking, that is really unhelpful. It feels good because it's like, okay, I have a rule. If this is all bad and now I know how to think about it, right? But that is not that helpful, because life is just much more nuanced, and it's probably getting people stuck. And obviously substance use. It feels good, that's why people do it, but it can certainly, for everyone and for teens in particular, have some negative consequences. So what should people do instead? Come back to this values-driven behavior. Do things that add meaning to your life. Work on psychological flexibility. Instead of this right or wrong, good or bad, can I change the way that I'm thinking about this? Can I stop feeding unhelpful thoughts and start to feed more helpful ways of looking at the world, or a more helpful lens, if you're thinking about it that way? And self-care, getting enough sleep, taking care of your body, things like that. How do you help your students make good choices, though, right? Because we all now know all these really good things people should do, but we also know that when you tell students to do those things, they either roll their eyes, or they've heard it before, or sometimes they're really enthusiastic, yes, I'm going to do all those things, and then nothing changes. So this is probably the hardest part, is that the science of behavior change basically just tells us that people don't want to change their behavior. So unhelpful things are easier to come up with. Nagging. It's really tempting to do and just say, just practice, just do it, it's going to be helpful, just do it. And then you start to sound like their parents. Reminding them of their consequences. Well, if you don't do this, you won't be prepared, or if you take drugs, it's going to ruin your life. Punishing them for failing to meet their expectation or their own goal. So all those things, really tempting, and we all fall into it, and I fall into it sometimes because it's just, you want them to see the light, but they don't work that well, we know that. So what helps? Normalizing, helping them understand that actually it makes a lot of sense why they've chosen what they've chosen, but just because that makes sense doesn't mean it's helpful. Modeling, I think I've made that point several times, that the more that you walk the walk, the more they're going to believe it and see it in action, right? Because that's also showing them positive benefit where they didn't have to put in the investment. And providing opportunities. So rather than forcing them, nagging them, providing consequences, just keep giving that opportunity to make those good choices. And sparking curiosity, asking them to think about it, maybe come to those conclusions on their own whenever possible. And if you need to, incentivize. I think some people struggle with rewards, and it's controversial, but you get paid for your job, and you do your job because partially you get compensated for it. I think it's important to treat children and teens with respect too, to recognize that hard work should be paid off, And I think sometimes people, especially parents, struggle with the idea of rewards because they think, well, they should already be doing this. Like I think about a patient I once had who wasn't brushing their teeth, and the parent was so caught up on the fact that every other child brushes their teeth, they should just do this. And I was, yes, of course, but they're not. And if we get stuck in this idea of what they should be doing already, nothing's going to change. So let's focus on what behavior you want to see change, and can we reward that in the short term, not with the expectation that that will be a reward forever. All right, I actually am going to end after this, although there are a few more slides. This video, and the link should also be in the end of your slides, is 7 minutes, and it is a very nice, concise, accessible to teens way of talking about a lot of the things that we talked about today, using reverse psychology. So it tells you all of the ways to be miserable and unhappy and unsatisfied with your life. And I think that, as we just talked about, since nagging and everything is not that effective, sometimes allowing them to spark their own curiosity and think about it in a way where they might start to question, like, well, what choices could I make that might be different, can be helpful. I'm going to skip through these things a little bit. They should hopefully be in your slides, and I'm also happy to send a PDF if that would be helpful so you can see them larger. And then the last slide that I'll show you, these are all just resources for you that could be helpful, is that we do research, of course, at the university, and if you do have students who struggle with elevated symptoms of anxiety in particular, that's what most of our research is on, we sometimes have treatment studies available. So that could be something where if a parent is coming to you really concerned about their child's anxiety, that could be a resource that you share with them, that this would be treatment for free if they're eligible, and certainly when children are not eligible, we provide referrals. So I would like to open it up to questions and thoughts.
Well, yes, can you go to the slide with the link? Because on our sheet, is this kind of too small?
Which
for
link?
For the video link?
For the video. So what I would recommend is to, I don't know why I'm doing this, but yes, is to Google 7 tactics to maximize misery. And this will come up for sure. And be prepared for a good chuckle. Maybe don't watch it with your student the first time. Watch it yourself first. Yeah.
Could you talk about when to assist with referrals?
Yes. So I think that that's going to be on an individual case-by-case basis, right? Because it's going to depend on your relationship with the student and your relationship with the parent. But the things to be looking out for are how much is this impacting the child's life? What is getting in the way of their life? Are they identifying it? Is the student aware? That's going to really ease that conversation for you, right? Because then it's something to say, like, I can see that, Susie is really unhappy and she's telling me about that. I think it might be a good time to find her some extra help. So if they are identifying concerns,